One of the questions we're asking tonight, what's the relationship between weather, climate and environmental factors in relation to COVID-19? And does climate change dynamics have any impact on the spreading of the virus? Joining us to answer some of these questions is an expert, Wits School of Environmental Sciences, Professor Bob Scholes. Professor Scholes, good evening and thank you so much for your time. Before we get into the relationship between some of these environmental factors and the spread of COVID-19, just last week, we seem to have still been in the grips of winter, and depending on where you are in the country, if you're certainly in Gauteng, it looks like summer suddenly has just come in. Are these at all effects of the changing climate that we're living in?
So particular climate events like a cold spell really don't tell you much about climate change. It's only the pattern over a long period of time that can tell you that. But I do know that the winter that we've had recently in the Highveld of South Africa, you have to go back a long way to find such cold snaps as we've had in the recent couple of weeks. And the reason for that may be related to changes in the global circulation, particularly allowing cold polar air to come further north occasionally as a cold spell.
What are some of the weather patterns that you as scientists are looking at or even studying in relation to COVID-19?
So there is some suggestive evidence, not only from this disease, but from related disease, that it doesn't like very warm temperatures and it doesn't like extremely high humidities. So diseases such as this tend to transmit best under cold, dry conditions. And so we are looking at whether that effect is influencing the outbreaks around the world.
So comparatively then, which are the countries that you'll be looking at? And we're looking at a season now where South Africa is, of course, heading towards its own spring and summer months. Are you expecting that in itself is going to have a direct bearing on the kind of numbers we'll see when it comes to COVID-19 infections?
So the ideal way to look at this is to follow the climate in one place throughout a whole year, with everything else being held equal. But we really don't have time for that, because the epidemic is racing through the world, and we need to have answers about this climate sensitivity before we've seen a whole year out. So we do a rather clever trick, which we call a space for time substitution. In other words, instead of trying to follow the changes of climate in one place, we use the fact that there are different climates in different places to try and understand what that relationship is. That introduces all sorts of other complications. Because, for instance, other things are not equal in other places. They have different disease burdens and different socioeconomic conditions. But it is an advantage to use both northern hemisphere locations and southern hemisphere locations, because we're out of sync climatically. When they're in winter, we're in summer, they're in winter. So in a sense, we can get an advance warning of what might be coming our way.
Sure. I want us to look at it maybe from the South African perspective, but even from the region perspective, because we have a lot of countries now that are still implementing lockdown measures, and when you look at the pattern of COVID-19 within the region, do you expect that it will change in the region overall as we move towards summer and spring?
So when the COVID is in this extreme outbreak phase, when its basic reproductive number is really high, over 2, then the climate effect is almost undistinguishable. You can get COVID whether it's hot or whether it's cold or whether it's humid or whether it's dry, when it's in this extremely virulent kind of condition. It's only later, once our control measures and factors like possible herd immunity start kicking in, that the climate signal starts becoming an important relative to the other things that go on.
So then, as you track your work, and I know it's not necessarily clear cut, like right now, what are the indicators that you would be looking at in this very moment in order to tell whether or not the weather does play a significant impact?
So it certainly isn't clear-cut, and anyone who claims that they have detected a strong seasonality signal is not being completely honest. So the conservative approach to this is not to count on the arrival of summer helping us to combat this disease. It may, but we can't count on it. The other important factor is that we should not think that just because we've suppressed this disease come, let's say, December, that we will not be susceptible to second wave outbreaks when weather gets cool again in the middle of next year.
All right. Before you go, I want to take a look at the impact on the environment, especially on the lockdown. We've had those incredible pictures that have been released globally of what the world looked like as things came to a standstill. Is there a long-term effect of that? So even South Africa having industries slow down incredibly, little economic activity. It's bad news for those who, of course, have to make a living. But has the environment really benefited?
So in the short term, it has. I don't think that there is a direct long-term effect because those atmospheric pollutants that we're talking about have very short atmospheric lifespans. So when you shut down an industry, you immediately get a cleaning up of the atmosphere. But the moment you reopen it or you start driving on the roads again, it very quickly returns to its previous state. There may be a long-term effect, but it's actually an indirect one. For instance, we've all learned that we can, change our behaviors, and that governments, when they see a real danger and risk, can do things which are kind of unimaginable, like, lockdown and diverting huge amounts of resources into alternate energy paths. So what this has demonstrated to us is, firstly, what an effect we have on the climate, and secondly, that we are capable, if we want to, of doing something about it.